Ramsey, welcome to Easy Conversations. Thank you for joining me this morning. I'm really grateful to have this conversation with you. There's a lot to discuss, and I'm sure you have a lot to say about Palestine, your experience, and all the work you've been doing. But before we get started, I do want to give you an opportunity to share with the listeners a little bit about yourself. And what I find fascinating, I think there's some similarities in our story where we perhaps started off in a different career and have shifted and pivoted into different spaces for various reasons. And I'm sure you'll get to share yours. But yeah, over to you and let us know about who you are and what you've been up to lately.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. My name is Ramsey Hanhan, and I used to be a scientist. I worked in science for about 27 years, first as a graduate student, then I was doing teaching and research at a major university here in the DC area.
Mm,
And I enjoyed doing the science, but I also enjoyed writing. And having grown up in Palestine, I felt I had a really important story to tell. I couldn't bottle it up long enough. It was getting more and more critical, more and more urgent throughout the last decade.
hmm
And so I began writing in 2010 when my daughter was born. I wanted to leave a story to her about what it's like to be a Palestinian and what are the challenges that I faced in my life
mm,
that she is likely to encounter. And I picked up, I ended up quitting my science work in 2019 and with the intention of picking up this story, this autobiographical story, and turning it into a novel. It's called Fugitive Dreams.
hmm
And it was published in October 2022. So I was actually finally, I had a message, I had a story. I was telling the world what it's like to grow up in Palestine, to experience what I've experienced, and to come here to the US in October 2023 to talk about this book. And I had several book events planned in different cities. I did one in Bethlehem on October 4th. October 3rd, I got to tour El Khalil next door. I got to travel around and see different places. And the situation was extremely tense that week. There were settler raids in the West Bank every day, and there were Palestinians getting killed in confrontations with Israeli soldiers. Also, daily, there was someone killed in Ramallah that week. And I'm like, this situation is unsustainable. The wall has been up for 20 years. And sure enough, on October 7th, we were surprised, just like everybody else in the world. And I took to writing as a way to just keep myself grounded while informing my network of what's going on the ground. So I started reporting every day.
mm,
And those poems and essays that I wrote throughout the last couple of years became this new book that's just published,
hmm
Palestine Bleeds For You. But I think everything you need to know about Palestine is in Fugitive Dreams. To me, the way I end Fugitive Dreams, or at least end the narrative section, at about 2020. So, right at the start of the COVID pandemic, I say, the wall remains, the knee of a policeman on the neck of a captive nation, crying to a world gone deaf, I can't breathe. And that was the greatest danger that I foresaw, is the silence, is the world's indifference, is fear of speaking out, apathy, whatever the
hmm
causes and the roots of all of that. It makes the world a much more dangerous place for all of us. And so the second book is really elaborating on that point, trying to dig in and find out why are people so quiet? Why
Mm,
the world didn't move to stop a genocide?
mm,
Why there wasn't an outcry as what as the one that happened to the Ukrainian refugees? What's so different about us?
yeah.
So that's in a summary, in a nutshell, what
Yeah.
my
Yes.
work
Yeah.
has been about.
No, thank you for sharing all of that. And we'll definitely get into the work you've done and especially your latest book. But just for context, are you able to share your upbringing in Palestine? Because there's the whole notion of survivor's guilt that you've shared. And I think part of that was the inspiration behind you wanting to write and, like you said, share a story with your daughter. But what was it like when you were growing up there, and how were you able to get out and then reconcile this survivor's guilt that you speak of? I know there's a lot in there, but yeah.
Yeah. I actually spend a good amount of Fugitive Dreams talking about that. I could read you a short piece if you like. I'm just
Yes,
going to read from the introduction
absolutely.
because this to me was the most painful part, is that children are subjected to this trauma from almost the moment they're born. And there's this continuous ongoing trauma that people experience under occupation that lasts for a long time, lasts for their lifetime, but at the same time, it's ongoing. Every day there's something.
Mm,
So I'm going to read Under the Desk, mid 1970s, 3 year old. My house was my castle where I played under the loving, caring eyes of my mom and grandma. Stay away from the windows or you may get a stray bullet, mom's voice anxiously pealed, delivering one of my earliest lessons in life. Outside, the streets were in turmoil, spilling the sound of gunfire and the smell of burning tires and tear gas into the house. I'm going to skip a little bit. Of course, I peeked when I could, wondering what a stray bullet looked like. School children of the same ages as my siblings poured out of the school across the hill, packing the streets. I could hear them chanting slogans while soldiers fired tear gas and shots. Then came the banging on the door, loud, continuous banging with the butt of a rifle. I thought the door would break. Through the cracks in the blinds, I saw the soldiers strutting on our patio. What did they want from us? Will they search the house? Are they looking for children? Soldiers don't like children. I see them shooting at the older kids every day. Now they are right outside our house, so they must be here to get me. With this incontrovertible logic of a 3 year old, I quickly scampered and hid between my dad's desk and the wall, a narrow crack into which I could barely squeeze myself. There I would be safe from those big, monstrous soldiers. Breathless, I stayed as long as I could hear the thuds of their boots and the jangles of their guns. And that was my actual experience growing up in the 1970s. And it just keeps getting worse decade after decade. The children in Gaza. I remarked by the summer of 2023 that the average 2 year old in the Gaza Strip had experienced 3 bombings in their lives, where bombs are actually falling from the sky and you get loud explosions.
mm,
And before you're even 2, you've seen 3 of those in August 2022, May 2021, and May 2023.
mm,
So that was the unsustainable reality that existed before October 7th. Now, if you're in the US or Canada and you turn on the TV, it's like everything there was quiet and peaceful until Hamas did this thing on October 7th, and that's completely not true.
mm, mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah. Well, and unfortunately, that's where a lot of people draw the line in the sand, right? And I've heard you say when people ask the question about condemning Hamas and what they did on October 7th, your view and perspective is that's the wrong question to ask. What is the correct question then that we should be asking as a people?
It's really about justice. How do we treat everybody as a human being and
Mhm.
respect their rights as human beings? The ones who ask me to condemn Hamas, that's a conditional. I will listen to you only if you agree with me.
Mm,
And so it's basically shutting out my voice,
mm,
refusing to listen to me, putting me in a light. And that's aside from everything else that they call it the barbaric attack.
mm,
So they're already prejudging us as barbarians. And now if I show up, the only role I'm allowed is to plead that I'm not a barbarian. And then maybe they'll let me speak. And I refuse that whole formula. I am a human being, whether they like it or not. And I'm going to speak.
mhm,
And I'm going to speak to the people who are willing to listen, like yourself and the people on your show. I don't care about the rest of the media world. I think by ignoring our voices, the mainstream, or the ones who like to call themselves mainstream, are delegitimizing themselves. No one
mm.
believes the New York Times anymore after running those fake stories about rape.
Right.
And they're losing their credibility. CNN, it's
Yes. Yeah. And speaking of silencing, you've also shared your experience of being silenced. You know, you're fairly active on LinkedIn and you're sharing quite a bit on there. I don't know about other platforms that you're using, but that's the one I've seen you on. What what happened for you? Are you able to share how you were being silenced even on the social media platform side of things?
LinkedIn is terrible. I was banned for about 7 months in the immediate aftermath of October 7. My viewership went up because I was reporting from Palestine.
Mm,
Went up significantly. I gained 500 new followers in 1 week. I got 100,000 views, and then all of a sudden I go in the morning to my LinkedIn account and I can't log in.
mm,
They said my account was restricted. I had to prove my identity. They wouldn't accept the documents I was sending them. It took me 7 months to actually recover. And when you think about it, I wasn't the only one. They silenced hundreds of thousands of voices.
mm,
And so imagine what the response of the world would have been like had we been out there talking about our experiences every day.
mhm,
And that's the problem, is by the silencing gave them a cover to commit war crimes. And the silencing is ongoing now. Instead of shutting accounts completely, which they still do, they would just take our post and put it in a different queue where it's not seen. A lot of the posts I see in my LinkedIn feed are 1, 2, 3 weeks old. They just show up. I just see them because they're maybe being moderated or under review for a couple of weeks. And there's nothing as a writer I can do about that. I tried playing tricks. Instead of Palestine, I used the number 4, or
mm,
genocide. I spell it differently.
mm,
But it's like you can't win. It's almost as if they have someone monitoring my account, and whenever I post something, they're going to report it.
mm. So how have you then been able to find other ways? You know, obviously you've touched on writing. How are you sharing your work, and how is that allowing you to find meaning for yourself as you continue to write?
It's been difficult for the last 3 years. I've been jumping from different social media sites and they all censor. This year I started on Substack and it's looking good so far compared to the other sites.
Mm,
That's one place you can find me, renegadeliving.us. But ultimately my hope was that I will just write and then publish this book, and
mm-hmm,
books have a different longevity.
mm-hmm,
Suddenly even a site like Amazon has its best interest to sell books, so they're not going to ban my book as
Right.
readily as social media sites might shut me down.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's my hope. And that gives me a platform. I've been engaged in local community groups, giving talks here and there, attending events, showing my support to different causes. And that connectedness, I think, is the ultimate way out for a lot of us is don't do this on your own. Go outside and find a community, especially locally, that can address what you're going through. And that's, we have to build alternate ways, we have to build alternate institutions, and we have to support each other throughout the way.
Yes. Yes. And I do want to take maybe a couple of steps back. We talked about that line in the sand of October 7th and then just treating that in a vacuum. But this is not something new, right? And speaking of books, I've been fortunate enough to read quite a bit about this situation. And I just wanted to get your thoughts, but also hopefully ground the listeners and the audience around some of the history as much as we can delve into it in the short amount of time we have, because there's a lot there. But the Zionist movement didn't just start with the Nakba, right? This has been going on, as far as I can tell, late 1880s, 1890s, and then slowly you talk about the Balfour Declaration, then the UN partition movement, but there's one after another thing that was being stacked against the Palestinians, and they were being silenced since that time, right? Since the settlers started coming in. Are you able to speak to that a little bit just to help us understand the historical context? Because unfortunately, unless you go seek it through the form of books, the mainstream isn't talking about that, at least for the most part.
Yeah, the mainstream has this weird thing where we've been fighting for 3,000 years, but everything started on October 7th
Yes.
simultaneously.
Yes.
Or, yeah. I read this article 2 days ago online about what do you call generational trauma
Mm,
or
mm,
intergenerational trauma.
yes.
And especially in the case of Palestine, this was written by a Palestinian marriage therapist who would interview couples about their entire family history, going back to their grandparents, and interview living members of the family to establish the structure of
Mm,
trauma.
mm,
And I tried to follow just some of the questions that she asked in that article. I think Sandra Khalil is the name
mm,
of the therapist. And so this was just yesterday in my diary. I could list about 30 things
mm,
that are intense, prolonged periods of trauma that someone in my family experienced and passed down in some way or another. For example, you have World War One.
mm,
World War One, we had a famine in Palestine and a locust plague that ate everything. So that experience of famine somewhere up the line has significant biological health effects on me. An
mm,
example was last year when we had a famine in Gaza twice, and you had malnourished children. And some of my American friends here said they're going to go on on a fast in support of the children in Gaza. And I thought about it, and there is no way I could go on a fast, especially at this time. My natural reaction is to eat more. I was gaining weight
mm,
uncontrollably instead because I feel like I'm threatened, like I'm next, I'm Palestinian. They're out to starve all Palestinians.
mm,
And so now I'm trying to reverse that and exercise more and eat more healthy
mm.
despite everything that's going on.
Yes.
So that kind of emotional eating is one trait. The Nakba is another thing when
Mm,
My parents lost their homes entirely, lost everything, had no memorabilia left. And as a result, I grew up with a mom that's hoarding everything. And I started hoarding, and now my daughter is a hoarder. And when I think about it, that all comes back to that experience of war and World War II, the
Mm.
British occupation. So you can look at it as a history that you read in the books, that you have different historians arguing about different facts and blah,
Mm-hmm.
blah, blah. And that kind is really irrelevant history. That's not what's important, is not the documentation and the signature of Lord Balfour on some document. It's the pain that a whole entire generation of an entire nation, because my family's experience is not unique. Almost every
Mm-hmm.
Palestinian family has experienced those same things. And so that's like one is like the trauma that you experience from just the state of war, and that's not unique to us. A lot
Mm-hmm.
of people around the world have experienced that kind of trauma. Bangladesh, for example, had famines that were really long lasting in effect for generations.
Mm-hmm.
But going back to Palestine, what's different is after the Israeli occupation, starting in 1948 on the Palestinians who were left and continuing on Palestinians up to this very moment, is this continual psychological warfare
Mm-hmm.
that we're subjected to. So this is not just trauma. This is an attempt for someone to psychologically destroy us.
Mm.
It's things like the home invasions. I read you a passage about that.
Yes.
They may have tactical explanations for every knock on the door. We need someone to clean up this wall from the slogan,
Mm.
or we need to arrest somebody, or we're searching for weapons. But to the child, there's one signal, one message that's coming. No place is safe. Your home is not inviolable. We could come in anytime and do whatever we want to you. And they want that message to be read by the youngest of children so that their whole lives they have this fear and this inferiority and this lack of safety. And again, that touches not just myself, but the entire generation after generation of Palestinians. So the refugees in Ukraine, when everything changed to blue and yellow all over social media feeds, and they didn't have someone chasing them, trying to kill them or starve them. Experience that kind of deliberate psychological trauma that we're experiencing. Another kind of psychological trauma is Nakba denial. My
Mm.
parents spent their entire lifetime, whenever they talk to a Western person, the Nakba did not happen. It's wrong. The Israeli propaganda was all over the place telling us. So they spent their lives in defensive trying to prove that the Nakba actually happened,
Mm.
which they experienced as an immense trauma. They lost their homes, they lost their livelihoods, they lost everything.
Yes.
And then they're being chased into the decades later. And the same thing is happening. They're committing a genocide right now, and they're still denying it. No,
Mm-hmm.
it's not a genocide, arguing over the terms, and that's psychological warfare.
Mm.
That their most noted Holocaust scholar finally, after 3 years, decided that's a genocide. He can go to hell with all the rest of them.
Mm. The A lot of the things you hear and the tactics that are being used, if you start piecing everything together, it comes back to your point about the type of warfare methodologies that are being employed. One of the things I've noted is how men of the homes and often the boys of the home were being targeted as the occupation was taking place. And then you hear about the open air prisons where, again, teenage boys are abducted and put into prison. what is the rationale behind that, right? Like for me, immediately I can appreciate why that they're doing that, right? Again, it's part of the fear that's being instilled, but you take away the man of the home, what does that do to the family?
Yeah, the trauma I talked about so far did not include like imprisonment, or this is just general. Once you talk about these effects, the time I was a teenager, I was there in the 1987, the first Intifada began. And that was people my age, a little bit older, throwing stones at soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
About one third of my classmates were arrested for throwing stones. They get beaten, they get put in prison for 3 months. And again, that's just to traumatize you, to make you feel that you are helpless, we're stronger than you, your stone is worth nothing, we have the power to mess up your life. And they're deliberately targeting teenagers because of that. It's like an alternate education that they're thrusting on us. It's the same reason they search us systematically at airports, at border crossings, going to Jordan. They would make us take off our clothes. I call it sexual abuse. But a lot of us were, especially because of our conservative culture, a lot of us didn't even talk about it because we were so traumatized that we wouldn't even talk about it. And so I tried to change that in Fugitive Dreams. I have a chapter on that because we have to acknowledge the reality. We have to know what we're being subjected to in order to resist it. The most common portrayal of Palestinians in US media is angry protesters. They like to stress that anger part, that
Mm,
because it goes well with the barbarian theme. You know what? When you're witnessing genocide and you're witnessing babies being burned to death every day, anger is a right, it's a duty, it's a self-defense mechanism
mm,
activated. Because the ones who are seeing that and not getting angry or not allowing themselves to feel the anger,
mm-hmm.
they're actually doing a lot more damage to themselves long term
Yes.
than the ones who are feeling the anger and expressing it.
Mm,
So that's one of the themes I go into in the second book is
mm-hmm.
how do we deal with this? How do we process genocide? Why we need to be angry?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. So you talk about the Intifada. Can you help us understand what that means? Because there's a lot of negative connotations to that word because people don't fully appreciate what it is, right? So yeah, help us
There's a
understand.
negative connotation to anything Palestinian.
Right. Yeah.
So that's the way it is. There's a part of the psychological warfare is to delegitimize us, to
Mm,
associate us with everything that's horrible and negative in the world, so that dehumanization, it's the prelude to eliminating us.
mm,
They have to make us look ugly in a very Kafkaesque way.
mm,
And so let me put it clearly and plainly. The Intifada means love, means you love your community, you love freedom, you love everybody to be free,
mm,
and you want to resist those people and forces and institutions that are stopping that freedom.
mm,
So in our time, the Intifada started, the occupation was in the West Bank and Gaza for 20 years. They were building settlements surrounding our towns. They had a military base south of Ramallah, a military base choking us from the north. And they would patrol our streets every day, stop us, ask for ID, harass us at will. That was going on before the Intifada. So what the Intifada did was say, no, we're
mm,
not, we reject that apartheid system. And it was very disciplined. A lot of the media focuses on the stone throwing, which,
Mm-hmm.
in my opinion, is non-violent when you're throwing a stone at someone who's fully armed with live fire and shields and helmets and everything. It's a play on words to call it violence,
Mm-hmm.
because violence is not necessarily physical violence anymore. The pilot who's sitting in a room somewhere playing and pushing a button on a drone, that's more violent than anything a Palestinian throwing stones had ever done.
Yes. Yeah.
So let's be clear about that. But the idea of the Intifada is to get rid of the occupation. It's a shaking off, is the actual literal meaning of the word.
Mm.
We want to shake off that occupation. 80% of its work was done not in confrontations with Israelis, but quietly behind the scenes. I discussed that in Fugitive Dreams. Chapter 7 is about the outward, the day to day, what's in the news
Mm.
stuff. And chapter 8 is about the longer term. What we did was we formed an alternate government
Mm-hmm.
for the West Bank and Gaza, an alternate institution that was grassroots. We organized what's called neighborhood committees. So every neighborhood meets together, every house sends a delegate to that meeting. We decide our own affairs. We don't want to cooperate with Israel at all. So all the people who worked for the Israeli civil administration, they quit their jobs.
Mm.
So suddenly we had no municipal workers, no one to take the trash. We had to replace those functions. We had to build our own alternate institutions. And that, I think, is the most powerful means of resistance. We came very close. And that's a very good reason why they want us to outlaw Intifada, because the
Mm.
word itself, if we want to apply it here, we need alternate institution. The government in the US is failing us drastically. We are desperate for an American Intifada where we get rid of CNN and replace it with decent media, and etc., etc., etc. And the work of the Intifada is not violent and confrontational. That's the superficial part of it. The real work is done underground, building things. Israel shut the schools for 2 years during the Intifada, and we had to organize alternate classes.
Mm.
And that was illegal. A building where unauthorized educational activity took place would be demolished. And we still would meet in secret and play tricks like walk one by one to the classroom so that we're not seen as going as a group, and so on, just to get an education at a time when Israel closed our schools.
Mm.
So that's what an intifada is.
Mm. Mm. And I just wanted to emphasize because you talked about the throwing. I remember when I was growing up, I would see comedians talk about how Palestinian children would make great baseball players because they throw stones. And there's a sadness to that because to your point, what else do they have? How do they fight back when they're being shot at?
I smile because you don't see it from here, but right in front of me, I have a photo of my daughter, and she's 3 or 4 years old. And I take her to the river to throw stones in the river. She's throwing this huge rock, like bigger than her hand. Yeah, what else are they going to throw?
Mm.
And I developed an interest in looking at old stuff from the 1930s just to read about Palestine at the
Mm-hmm.
time of the British occupation.
Mm-hmm.
And I have newspapers and magazine clippings and everything. And all those old stuff, you still have the same thing. You have Palestinians throwing rocks at the British soldiers
Mm.
because we were disarmed forcefully and violently after the 1936 revolt. And going back even further in time, you have shepherds throwing stones with a sling just to keep their sheep in line and prevent them. And there's photos of them documenting them in the 1920s doing that. So it's really a historical biblical tradition that David and Goliath
Mm-hmm.
continues to this day. And anyone refusing to see it as such is just blinding themselves.
Mm. Mm-hmm. So we've talked about people's inability to fully appreciate the situation and often looking at it in a vacuum. There's You've also talked about the vilification of protests when that's often the only option available. But then you've also talked about the colonization of the mind, which I think is an interesting about the colonization of the mind. And how do you piece all of this together around how people are viewing the situation without seeing the full picture?
The colonization of the mind goes along with the intergenerational trauma.
Mm,
So I have a photo of my grandfather. He's dressed in the traditional Palestinian thobe and wearing a tarbouch and so on. My dad, I never saw him like that. He was always dressed top London fashions with suit and tie. And it's not just him. A lot of people in his generation. He was around 18, 20 years old when the Nakba happened. He was studying in Beirut.
mm,
A lot of people across the Arab world changed that outlook. The West is militarily more superior to us, therefore, their civilization must be better.
mm,
We need to learn from them. We need to go to the West and study in Western universities. Maybe there's a secret. A lot of them went into science and engineering for that reason. Maybe we can figure out how to build better weapons. And it's all about protecting ourselves. And in doing so, we absorb things from the West blindly. We put them on a pedestal almost. And that's going generally throughout the colonized and formerly colonized world. But in
mm,
Palestine, the colonization is ongoing. And combine that with our voices being silenced, you get a lot of Jewish and Israeli or ex-Israeli voices being put on pedestals.
mm,
My parents were talking about the Nakba for 80 years. Suddenly, in the mid 1990s, one Israeli historian who was buying the mainstream Zionist line for all that time suddenly gets to look into the state archives. And, oh my God, the Nakba actually happened. He writes about it.
mm,
Suddenly, he's a hero. Palestinians are sharing his work with the world. Look, even he says it.
mm,
They corroborate our point of view. I don't need that corroboration. I believe my parents. I don't need to hear from Ilan Pape or whoever it is the stuff that I already knew was truth. So it breaks my heart. It saddens me that so many pro-Palestine activists, and especially Palestinians,
mm,
you see them of sharing what can we do about this. Here's some books you can read. Here's a list of 5 books about Palestine. The rest are all Israelis or ex-Israelis.
mm.
And that's not right. That's mental colonization. And the only way we could address it is by respecting ourselves and respecting people from our community. I talked about the silencing, but also is the credentialing that Israelis are in such a position of privilege that it's very easy for one of them to get an education, travel, go to overseas conferences, get awards and so on, and get appointments in the top Western universities.
Mhm.
Someone who grew up in the West Bank, who went to Birzeit University, who's working there 6 months a year because the other 6 months the university is shut down by the Israelis or raided by them. They don't have the privilege. It will take them 40 years to get what the Israeli researcher has done in 20. And they're not going to get credentialed. They're not going to get, if they get a faculty position at a Western university, at the first social media post that's critical of Israel, they might get fired. So when you have that kinds of disadvantages, we need to support our Palestinian writers in every possible way, not diminish their work the way we do. You
Yeah.
know, I'm sorry, I really respect the works of Ilan Pappé and Miko Peled and other people, but I'm sick of people recommending those same books, those same voices over and over when there are so
Hmm.
many other voices that
Right.
know better, that have actually spent a day on their occupation.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Well, and what I'm hearing from you is the idea that, yes, while people like Ilan Pape have done a good job of demonstrating what's happened, what you're saying also is, well, go talk to the Palestinian who is experienced it firsthand and don't minimize their experience. And I think collectively putting it all together, you can get a better idea of the full situation as opposed to just looking at things in isolation as well, right? So that's kind of the idea. It's not to undermine or diminish the work that other people have done.
It's the lived experience is irreplaceable.
Yes.
Is in the I would accuse the academic establishment as a whole
Mm,
of diminishing that lived experience to detrimental effects.
mm,
Academia has different goals necessarily than finding the truth. We need to discover and its discovery and so on, but there's all those hierarchies and awards and merits, competitions, and people are doing things for the wrong reasons
mm,
sometimes in
mm,
academia. And it tends to obscure some of the more direct experiences of people.
mm,
And especially the fact that it privileges some points of view more than others. That's dangerous.
mm,
And when you look at it, like how many academic institutions have recognized the genocide in Gaza? How many professional societies, journalism societies that spoke out against the targeting of Palestinian journalists,
mm,
or medical societies that talked about the shooting of babies in the head, or I can go on and on. There's a complete failure in the academic system in the United States and Canada in dealing with this deep injustice, in dealing with, they're basically afraid of being seen as anti Semitic, and they're letting that one button destroy all the other principles for human rights that
mhm,
they claim to uphold.
mhm.
And so, all those institutions, media, universities, professional societies, they're in a state of moral collapse.
Yeah.
And that's something for us here to worry about. That's the immediate impact is going to be on us, on Americans
Mm,
and Canadians who cannot trust their institutions anymore.
mhm. Yes. Yes. And to shift gears a little bit, you said, and I think that's kind of the message that's coming up a little bit too, that maintaining a positive outlook is difficult, right? And you also talk about hope not being a feeling. So how do you move forward if that positive outlook is difficult at times, and how do you reconcile that with hope? What gives you hope?
Yeah, I would say hope is not a feeling, it's a practice.
Mm,
So every day you have to get up and say, what can I do to make the world a little better at the end of
mm,
the day, even if
mm,
it's just for myself, or for a couple of people around me. And if you can do that, the world is a little bit better. You go to sleep, you wake up the next morning, news from Gaza. Oh my God, I
Mm,
still have to pick up and get on and do something while I still can.
mm,
I, at this point, like especially for Palestinians outside or anyone else who's experiencing trauma that they cannot control,
mm,
you have to resist victimhood. I think that's the greatest danger. Because if you feel like a victim, then it's very easy to just give up and do nothing. My actions are irrelevant. They're not going to change anything. So I'm going to do nothing. And that's exactly the whole point of the psychological warfare, from knocking on doors at night to arresting people to fake news and trolls all over the social media, is to rob you of that feeling, that of agency, of feeling that
mm,
you can actually do something.
mm,
And so recovering that agency is very important for us in order to fight back, in order to resist.
mm.
And I've addressed that actually at the very end of Fugitive Dreams. I want to read you another
Yes, please.
small passage. For my own well being, I need to reaffirm I am not a victim. Survivor is the wrong word either. I choose not to be defined by my traumas. I am far greater, deeper than that. The pain inflicted upon me by others binds me not.
Mm,
We have to remember that whatever trauma they're inflicting on us,
mm,
that's theirs to own. We and I note here, I continue, that the same applies collectively. Generations of Palestinians define themselves by the conflict or let themselves be defined by it. We are Palestinians because we have experienced a certain tragic history of loss and diaspora. We've been portrayed as refugees, as a hostage population, as fighters for freedom, yet we are greater than all that. We are resourceful and resilient. Despite losing our entire country, we refuse to succumb to a life of destitution. We strove to rebuild, to work, to educate ourselves.
mm,
Even in the foreign countries, we were condemned to wander. Our fate as a people never stopped us for striving for our dreams. Our national defeat never crushed our spirits. And so that's really what gives me hope, is
mm,
looking at the stories of the Nakba and the post Nakba,
mm,
how my parents and people of their generation rebounded and recovered and rebuilt. Life goes on, and when you think about it, life is much stronger than death.
mm,
Those who wield death are actually weaker because all they have, the most they could do is kill people.
mm,
It's life that's more powerful. And we cannot forget that. We cannot succumb to the psychological pressures that want us to feel hopeless and helpless, because we're not.
mm, mm. And that brings the idea of collective healing that you talk about, and the idea of empowering each other that's allowed Palestinians to recover. And the other thing you talk about is it's inspiring to see the resistance, even though that gets vilified as well, right? So at least if we were to stay on this side of seeing the empowerment, seeing the resistance, and the collective healing, is that what you're talking about? That's where the agency lies. Is there is still a lot of work to be done, but that collective healing is powerful.
Yeah, I would credit the resistance in, and not just, I'm not talking about just October 7th, I'm talking about like since 1948.
Mm-hmm.
with that empowerment. For example, let's go back to the historical period of the 60s. The 50s were a terrible time for Palestinians. People are helpless, they're in refugee camps, they're depending on outside aid to come in. And some people, for example, they stopped waiting, they started building their own homes out of sand or mud or whatever they could find. And that act of taking charge of your own life was empowering to those families that chose that way.
Mm.
And then some others started, we don't have to wait until the world gives us a place. We could take that place. They picked up a gun. They joined one of the many groups that were forming, Fatah, PFLP, etc. at the time, that later became the PLO. And joining those groups was a form of empowerment, was a form of agency.
Mm.
There are others who did that with a pen, who started writing about empowerment. I cite Ghassan Kanafani a lot because I actually read his short stories, not in Palestine. He was banned in Palestine.
Mm.
So I didn't read his work thoroughly until the 1990s when I came to the US and could discover it in the library here. And he has this series of short stories that are all about the Nakba, how people were kicked out of their homes. But in each one of those stories, he has a slightly different ending. A child picks up a gun and shoots at that sniper who was terrorizing everybody.
Mm.
Or someone, he leaves his store and he knows the Zionist armies are going to come and take over his merchandise and everything. He stuffs bombs in it so that it would detonate on them or something. And that kind of thinking was, Ghassan Kanafani was maybe 12 years old when the Nakba happened.
Mm.
So he had that trauma of loss as a child. And for him, writing those short stories was replaying that trauma over and seeing how else it could have ended. What else could have I done as a child to stop this from happening? And that's why his stories were so popular at the time, is they resonated with a lot of people who were feeling disempowered
Mm-hmm.
as children and saw in his literature, felt the empowerment.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we're in a similar stage in our history where we've been dealt a devastating blow as a people by just the sheer number of death and the grief that we're living every day. But at some level, as a nation, we have that whole collective experience of the last 80 years as a resource, as a treasure that will help us continue and will help us build a better future.
Yes.
And I think that's where we need to focus, is
Mm.
empowerment and agency.
Mm. Yes. But you're also talking about the impact these things have if you're growing up in this situation, right? So, what about the mental health of the children that are being exposed to this day in and day out? They don't know any different way of being, but the nervous system obviously reacts to your environment. So, when you think about the children there, what comes up for you?
Like I say, it's devastating. It's almost hard for me to imagine it. The stuff that I saw as a child were horrific enough, and that was nothing compared to
Mm.
what's going on today.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
I'm sure the effects will last with them for a lifetime, unless they're aware of that and they receive adequate support. Now, The one thing that gives me hope is that the presence of the collective structure. So during the first Intifada, I was there, and despite everything, my morale was very high. I was feeling very upbeat. It always felt like the liberation is around the corner because we were involved in it, we were part of it. The second Intifada, which happened around 2000 to 2004, I was in USA. I was watching things on TV. And there it felt much more painful. I felt a lot more disempowered, a lot more helpless. So there's a communal healing that goes on in situations like this that's really important.
Mm-hmm.
And we here are missing that, but I'm hoping that the people in Gaza still have the cohesiveness of the social fabric to maintain that. Israel tried to destroy that. Why are they bombing entire neighborhoods? Why are they forcing these mass expulsions? They want to isolate people from each
Mm-hmm.
other. They want to destroy family ties. They want to destroy so that the survivors have little chance for recovery. It's not just a matter of a body count and arguing over numbers of the health ministry. It's the fate of the living worries me
Yeah.
more. And I write that in the second book at some point.
Mm.
But I believe in the resilience of our people, and the everything we've learned in the last 80 years will help us. Every Nakba story that my parents told me has come to be beneficial for me.
Mm.
And so we have to look inside for that strength,
Yes.
both individually and collectively.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I want to bring it back to yourself. And earlier you were talking about anger, and there's a place for anger. But at the same time, I've learned you have to figure out a way to channel that anger. And you've obviously chosen writing and sharing your story to empower that and channel it. What would you like to say to other people who are experiencing that anger and sometimes feeling helpless because maybe writing is not their thing? How do they channel that emotion?
Find local communities that support Palestine and talk to those groups and see what kind of activities they do. You might be interested. Doing anything is
Mm,
helpful psychologically. Anything effective, I should say. There's a problem with the way USA is organized, where a lot of activist energy gets directed to electioneering for this or that candidate, and that effort gets absorbed and dissipated. You're watching the World Cup and the suckers have this huge energy that they're cheering. If they actually went on a protest, that protest could topple the government.
mm,
But and likewise, they have those similarly meaningless activities that engage the American public. Going to protest in DC on a Saturday, you could have a huge protest that no network would cover and nobody would see because it's all empty buildings. Or writing endless letters to your representatives who will just toss them in the wastebasket. At some point, I was doing those things, but by November of 2023, when the death count was going up, if those people didn't move for one child getting killed, they're not going to move. And so we really have to focus on building alternate institutions and looking at long term change in the way governance happens in countries that call themselves democracies, because what we're seeing is anything but democracy.
mm. Yeah.
And we actually have a lot. We Society likes to marginalize us.
Mm-hmm.
Those in power keep their power by making us feel powerless. And we have to remember we have three things that are directly under our control: our time, our labor, and our money. Now, money is not very easy. A lot of us don't have, unless you're a billionaire, we don't have too much spending income. Choosing not to skip your daily coffee at Starbucks, that's a good thing, but it's not going to tilt the balance for something. We can talk about sanctions and divestment and so on, and those are important. But really, the lifestyle is more critical. Is
Mm.
who are we working for? Who our employer is? That's very important. How Because by giving them our labor, we're giving them a lot more worth. They have to make a value on our salary in order to justify our salary. So
Mm-hmm.
the company is we work for is making an enormous value.
Mm.
That's the reason I quit science. I was working on government grants from the mostly Department of Energy. And so I was very dependent on the US government, which funding fluctuated,
Mm-hmm.
but I was also somehow contributing to their mission. And I got to a point where, okay, I no longer want to contribute to the mission of the US government, even if it means a drastic loss in income
Mm.
that I might not be able to immediately replace.
Yes.
And so to make myself afford that, I had to drastically cut spending. So I'm not
Mm-hmm.
spending extravagantly. I'm still driving an old car, etc., etc. But I have the peace of mind that I'm not contributing to the mission of what most of the world's population consider the greatest threat to the planet.
Mm.
And likewise, we have to consider who are we giving our labor to. Those in the tech industries are especially in the crosshairs because the tech industry has played a huge role in facilitating that genocide with AI and AI targeting and so on. And now they're repackaging those services and selling them commercially. And so people working anywhere, not just for those companies, but anywhere in the tech and AI sectors need to pay attention to what they're doing. Um, and so by thinking carefully about our life choices, where we work, where we spend money, where we hang out, who we hang out with, what media we listen to, that all gets to shape us and how we're influencing this society.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we need to do as much as we can to unplug from mainstream and build our own alternate world where we can thrive and everybody else can thrive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. And you've talked about not contributing to the players yourself, but then how do you find your place in the Western world, right? So you moved to the United States. It's allowed you certain opportunities, right? So how do you find your place in this part of the world and reconcile that? And again, we touched on the guilt, right? The survivor's guilt, but outside of that, how do you find your place?
When you look at the totality of human history, nationalism is a very thin layer of silliness where you watch it in the World Cup,
Mm-hmm.
those fans are going to kill each other over a game. And people are like that. But if you look at historically, migration was
Mm.
something that humanity lived with from day one. The degree of similarity between languages that are as far apart as China and England are astounding. You have Islamic coins in like Finland and Norway and Korea.
Mm.
So people traveled all the time, people lived in other places. As long as So I think the idea, it's my hope that given the global crises that we're facing, especially things like climate change, that ultimately we get rid of this idea of borders
Mm,
and we treat every human as being equal. And if we can get to that point, that will solve a lot of problems.
mm,
That said, I am conscious that my presence here in America, I'm pretty much a settler. The very city that I live in, it's called Columbia. It was founded in 1967, which is the year Israel occupied the West Bank and Gaza. And it's advertised as a planned community. So I'm very conscious of that. When I go to the West, it's even worse.
mm,
You may see Indian names sometimes, but you don't.
mm,
A lot of native First Nations places are hidden. They don't
mhm,
have adequate memorials designating them as such. And so I feel like I'm in the settlements in the West Bank, driving on the highways between the settlements. And it's been bothering me for 20, 30 years, ever since I first noticed that. At the same time, I wouldn't be here if the US hasn't been subsidizing Israel to eliminate me for the last 40 years. How long they've been giving Israel money.
mm.
And so here we are.
Yes.
I can't change the reality. I can't change the fact that I'm here. I've actually been criticized by an activist friend. Like, you're here, you should be doing there. I only have respect for people who are under the fire.
Mm,
It's different now. I married here. I have a child here who is only half Palestinian, and she was born in America. So what can I do?
mm, mm,
And again, it goes back to the reality that human beings have always migrated and intermarried. And that idea of dividing people by nationality or by race or by any other means is really ridiculous.
mm, mm,
And we have to keep, if we want to evolve towards a better future, we really have to look critically at those distinctions and see whether they served humanity or they didn't. And
mm,
all we've seen in the era of nationalism is wars and more wars.
mhm. Yeah. I do want to spend the last few minutes that we have together, at least today, to talk about your book. Curious about the title. What inspired you to come up with the title Palestine? We bleed for you?
Bleeds for You.
Bleeds for you, yeah.
I went through some 30 something titles. The first one that I picked was Sumud is the Palestinian signature.
Mm,
And that's a quote from something I wrote on October 8th. Is that no matter, I was feeling defiant. I was like, no matter what Israel does, we're not moving anywhere. And true to the Palestinian spirit, the people in Gaza, no one really, very few left Gaza, even when they could. But 2 years into it, I felt that title was extremely unfair
mm,
because it's expecting that sumud. Sumud is steadfastness, is being staying in your place regardless of all the attempts to dislodge you. And I'm like, that's not a fair thing to ask of the people of 100 times more than what that word entails. And so I wrote to my publisher, I think it was the summer of 2024, actually. So just 1 year. I said, I want to put the responsibility on the reader or
mm,
myself or both.
mm,
And this title comes in line of putting the responsibility on the reader and myself. Gaza is not a taker, it's the giver. But I thought at first something like Gaza needs you was how it started. That's the aid agency slogan is donate to Gaza,
mhm,
Gaza needs help, Palestinians need help. I'm like, no, Gaza is not the taker here. Gaza is the giver. They gave their blood for all of us. If we want to honor them and honor their contribution, we need to understand what we need to do
Mm.
to bring them justice and accountability. Because that's the other thing is with all of this, we are witnesses.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen it. Once you've seen even one scene from Gaza where someone got hurt, you can't unsee that. And as a witness, we have a responsibility to testify. That responsibility is partly moral, but it's
Mm-hmm.
partly psychological. We have an inner need to tell people, no, what I saw is this. This is the truth. And if we're silent on the truth, then that sense of injustice will eat us up, because I think humanity has an inner need to be truthful.
Mm.
So that's why it's important to speak. We are all witnesses, and we all owe accountability to the people of Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so speaking out and being active and doing what we can, however big or small, to make it change is very important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And one last question. Before we started recording, you made reference to the Christmas tree in the background.
Oh,
Are you able to give us some context of why it's still up there?
I forgot about it almost. I when December of 2023, I did not
Yes.
feel like Christmas
Mm.
at all.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I'm like, I didn't even want to buy gifts for my daughter from the USA because USA was subsidizing Israel. I'm like, I don't even want the tax money collected on my purchases to go there.
Mm.
So I took her and visited my brother up in Canada. I'm like, at least Canada is a little more. We went up to Toronto. It was nice, but it wasn't. They had the Christmas tree up, but nowhere did we feel like Christmas.
Mm.
We were watching. I was on Twitter all day on Christmas Day watching how the church in Gaza was besieged, and people there, Christians who were hiding in the church for Christmas Eve, were being bombed. Bethlehem was bombed on Christmas Eve. That was 2023. 2024, I didn't feel like Christmas either. My daughter went with her mom on a trip, so I didn't make a tree. So this year, finally, reluctantly, I let my daughter decorate the tree. She decorated it herself. And after that, it's been like there has been no peace in
Mm.
2026.
Mm.
Every time I turn on the TV, my government, the US government, is doing something around the world,
Mm-hmm.
in Venezuela or Cuba or Iran. It's been a race just to keep up with what's going on.
Mm.
So I didn't take the tree down. I did and with my book out, no thank you. I have no time to take the tree. Maybe I'll keep it until next
Yeah.
Christmas. Some
Yeah.
of the decorations there were handmade by my grandmother.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
Christmas is a Palestinian holiday.
Yeah. Yeah.
May as well just keep it on.
Yeah. Well, it looks good. But Ramsey, thank you for this conversation. I really appreciate everything you've shared. And obviously the pain that you feel for the people is evident in everything you've shared, including your stories. Now, for people that want to learn more about your work or get access to your books, you what are some ways they can do that? Including, you made reference to your Substack as well. So,
Yeah, the best way is my link tree, linktr.ee/Ramsey Hanhan, and it
hmm
has links to everything else. But you can find my books at major retailers. I recommend ordering from your local bookstore if you can,
hmm hmm
because I really would like to support local bookstores. If the price is too steep, there's always the public library. You can again make a request with a library card. And that option is good because it makes the book available to other people to discover it.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is the new book, Palestine Bleeds For You. And Fugitive Dreams is my first book. It's 4 years old, but still highly valid.
Mm. Yeah. Well, we'll put all of that in the show notes. But Ramsey, thank you so much again. Really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much, Furkan. I appreciate the opportunity to talk.